10 spot we have Irene of Athens. Starting off this list today, we are heading back to the Byzantine Empire. Irene of Athens was the mother of Constantine VI, and while the pair co-ruled together for almost 2 decades, things ended in quite the tragedy. After the pair co-ruled, Irene did go on to rule on her own from 797 to 802 CE, but you might be wondering how she managed to outrule her son. Well, Irene, the ambitious ruler, wanted full control all to herself, so she asked for the help of some political allies to pull off a scheme against her own son. She began to lead a conspiracy against him to try and get him out of power. The duo did end up reconciling their relationship, but this is not where the story ends. In 786, the public began to turn their backs on Constantine because he had decided to divorce his wife and instead marry his mistress. Irene saw this as a second chance and once again chose to conspire against her own son. Honestly, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, this lady did not care. Here's where things in the story get exceptionally gory. Irene not only ordered the arrest of her son, but also ordered that his eyes be gouged out. Yep. That's how good old Mumsy came into power. In our number 9 spot today, we have Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth was a Hungarian noblewoman who lived from August of 1560 to August of 1614. She was born into one of the oldest and most powerful families in Transylvania, and she was well educated and ran various estates and bore many children. Oh, and this is all happening while she was also killing young women and bathing in their blood. Yeah. Weird, gross, terrible. Elizabeth is known for killing her servants and bathing in their blood as she believed it would keep her young. Guess no one told her about moisturizing and minding your own business. All accounts of Elizabeth remember her as a terrible, evil person. It is said that her number of victims most likely ranges somewhere from 175 to 200, but some claim it might be as many as 600 people. It is no wonder she is referred to as Countess Dracula. In our number 8 spot today, we have Olga of Kiev. Olga of Kiev became queen regent in 945 CE after her husband was killed, and during the time her son was just too young to rule. Olga knew that once her son was old enough to be crowned king, her power would be taken away, so she needed to see her wishes carried out before that happened. Her wishes included the capturing and killing of those who took the life of her husband, which was carried out using scalding hot water. Yeah, don't even want to imagine what that would have been like. Don't kill the king, I guess. Historically, it doesn't seem to work out well. Apparently in doing this, however, Olga developed a bit of a bloodthirst, and she would not rest until everyone associated with the people who killed her husband were all eliminated. She is the ultimate ride or die. It seemed like if you even looked in the wrong direction or breathed in the vicinity of someone who had something to do with the king's slaying, you could kiss your own life goodbye. Olga took hundreds of people out of the tribe that the killers were from. She devised a plan to bury the tribe leaders alive, and she even came up with a plan to set fire to their entire village. It is said that Olga may have locked the tribe's leaders in a bathhouse and burned it down, but we don't know for sure. All we do know is that she was not okay. In our number 7 spot today, we have Wu Zetian. Throughout the long and storied history of China, there has only ever been one woman who held supreme power, and that is Empress Wu Zetian. Of course, considering this historic feat, she wanted to ensure that she kept her power by any means necessary. She had all of her rivals killed, so anyone who could possibly overthrow her or come for her seat on the throne was eliminated. The Empress ordered the execution of the previous Empress as well as members of her own family. She had multiple methods of taking these people out, and rumor has it that she even had her own grandmother and 2 of her grandchildren killed for going against her. It didn't matter who you were, if you threatened her power, you were done for. It is said that after a while, the Empress decided to do a little less killy and a little more lovey-lovey. Yeah. Apparently she started spending more time with her lovers, using some aphrodisiacs. You know, we all are a little crazy when we're young, but as we get older, we all crave the simplicity and just someone to love. Right? Of course though, people don't forget, and they were sure to exact their revenge. The people fought back and ended up having all of her lovers killed, and the Empress herself was exiled. You know what they say about karma? She does not miss.
Number 6. Pretty firmly against cheating. Not to be weird, but I can kind of see where this queen is coming from. At first I sorta get it, but not later on, just at first. Henry II of France had a lifelong affair with his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, and even while on his deathbed, he begged his own wife, Queen Catherine de Medici, to allow him to see her. kind of really disrespectful to your wife, but I guess he loved his mistress too. I'm kind of confused on the morals of this. However, the queen was not confused on the morals and didn't give in to his plea. In fact, she even denied Diane entry into the room, letting the king pass away without having his dying wish granted. Damn. That ain't a crime. This queen had a daughter who took after her dear old dad when it came to the whole monogamous relationships, meaning she didn't really have them. When the queen mother found out about her married daughter's new romantic interest, she locked her daughter up in a castle and never saw her again. But she became even worse when she ordered her daughter's romantic interest to be executed in front of her. Now that is rough. And while she didn't do the deed herself, giving the order is kind of bad enough. It gets worse. Her son, King Henry, didn't like that she cruelly did this to her own daughter, so she had him dispatched as well. My goodness. Number 5. Bloody Mary. Duh. Mary I, or Bloody Mary as she is also known, was the first real Queen of Britain. But this reign didn't last very long, 5 years to be exact, before she was replaced by the much better Queen Elizabeth. But in that short 5-year span, Bloody Mary earned that title, let me tell you. Mary I ordered war against the Protestants and slew quite a hearty handful of them for heresy. Which is interesting since her father, Henry VIII, was kind of the guy who made Protestants more of a thing in England, and then her sister was also Protestant and made it the main religion in England. History is full of people needlessly passing away because what they believe isn't the right thing. Anyways, to heat things up, Mary even had some of these Protestants burned on the spot. Some is kind of an unfair statement. You see, the Queen here was responsible for burning over 300 Protestants at the stake. Other kings and queens burned people at the stake for their faith. I mean, Mary's father did it, as did her sister. But it's the sheer amount of people that make her much worse and much more famous. Number 4. Taking over. Queen Catherine the Great of Russia was obviously a queen of Russia. But that don't mean she was actually Russian. She was actually German-born. But she was Russian to get herself into power when it turns out her husband, Emperor Peter, was not very liked by his own people, as he showed a very obvious dislike for Russia, which is kind of weird. She took advantage of people's disdain, and while she may not have directly done the life ending here, it is pretty well stated that the act was committed by her supporters, and public opinion held her responsible. She was called the Great, but it seems she was actually kind of the absolute worst, even if she was a strong ruler. She does look very proud of herself in a lot of her paintings though, which, I mean, she overthrew her own emperor husband and became ruler of a country she isn't even native to. So like, yeah, I guess, good job, I think. Number 3. La Loca de Loco. Finally, a queen not on this list for ending other people's lives. No, Juana La Loca was far worse than that. Not to be insensitive, but Juana La Loca was loco. She was the Queen of Castile from 1504 to 1516, and she suffered from various mental disorders. After her husband died in 1506, her father buried his body, but that didn't stop La Loca from opening the tomb and caressing her husband's non-living body from time to time. Ultimately, she even ordered people to dig up the body fully, and she would kiss her deceased husband's feet. I'm sorry, excuse me, I need some water after that. That's disgusting. That's a lot. Oh good, we aren't done. Of course not. No, apparently Juana would also carry his coffin everywhere with her and even kept it under her bed. It wasn't until years and years later she allowed his burial outside her window, finally. Look, I get loving somebody, but dear lord, imagine what she was like when he was alive. Stage 10 clinger, 100%. Number 2, let them eat cake. How about a queen that caused a whole revolution? That's gotta be a good one. We have almost all heard of Marie Antoinette. She was well known for splurging on things she shouldn't have and the countless affairs and scandals she was involved in. Like the scandal of the necklace. Countess de la Motte pretended to be the queen's friend and entered the French court in 1785. She fooled a member of high society in believing that the queen loved him, even going as far as to hire a lady of the night, disguise her as the queen, and convince the poor guy that Antoinette wanted to purchase a diamond necklace that cost 1,600,000 livres, which is almost $12 million by today's money. The amount of sheer greed and debauchery that happened while she was around made her own people rise up and fight back against the unfairness of the French monarchy. Good job, you made your people hate you, cause y'all ignorant. Number 1. Countess not Dracula? Born in Transylvania, because of course she was, in 1560, Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary was a Hungarian noblewoman. But more than that, she was an extremely infamous serial slayer. She used her position of power to defend herself from ever having to suffer the consequences of the heinous crimes she would commit. Okay, well, name the crimes, Adam. Okay, I will. Elizabeth spent years slaying servants and peasants just because she wanted to and enjoyed it. She did it so much that her own husband, Count Nadasti, went so far as to build his wife a torment chamber for her to do this more comfortably. Great husband, horrible person. Elizabeth also had a nasty habit of actually feasting on her prey. She would often bite and eat chunks out of them while they were still alive, and in one case, she may have even forced someone to cook and eat some of their own body. Eventually, her conduct became so appalling that a trial was held. It only took forever to happen. She was convicted on 80 counts, but was only sentenced to solitary imprisonment within her castle. That's it. Like, how is that okay? I don't get it. She thankfully met her end 3 years later in 1614, but my lord was she a bad dudette. Not good.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Heart of Glass. Alexandria of Bavaria, the royal who believed she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass. I'm not joking, yeah, she was a princess, so not technically a queen, but this is so insane that I had to kick off this list with it. The 23-year-old Bavarian princess was quite the scholar. She was known to enjoy literature, but she equally put energy into convincing those around her that she'd swallowed a piano made entirely of glass when she was a wee child. She grew up afraid that her inner piano would shatter. We have an inner demon, she has an inner piano made of glass. So she would enter rooms slowly and sideways, I'm not kidding, to, you know, avoid cracking that personal piano problem. Just like King Charles VI, he thought he was going to break at any given moment. Saying you were made of glass was quite an uncommon delusion. The victims were more often than not royalty. They had glass, they watched this fancy material shatter in their hands all the time. No wonder, it probably scared them. There's actually a play on this glass delusion. It's called The Glass Piano by Alex Sobler. Quite recent too, apparently it's a blast. Check it out if you have the chance. We love that. Keep writing plays about glass pianos. This is insane.
At number 9, Rosemary's Baby. Back in the days of old, it was very important to the monarchy to have a male heir. Many kings throughout history have been known to get very upset when they weren't given a son to inherit the throne, and they put a lot of pressure on their wives to give them a boy. Why? I don't know. Boys kinda stuck. Anyway, this probably drove a lot of people crazy, but there is at least one confirmed case of crazy baby fever from Maria Eleonora. She kept trying to have a baby, but when she finally got pregnant, everyone was hoping for a boy. Unfortunately, the odds weren't in her favor, and she gave birth to a little girl instead. People knew that Maria would get absolutely triggered upon learning of her baby's gender, so they kept it a secret from her as long as they could, but eventually they had to tell her, and Maria was pissed. She really went looking for that receipt to return that baby and get a refund or at least a store credit. When she found out the baby was a girl, the queen reacted by saying, quote, "Instead of a son, I am given a daughter, dark and ugly with a great nose and black eyes. Take her from me, I will not have such a monster." End quote. Like, damn. Tell her how you really feel. After that, mysterious things started happening to this baby, like a wooden beam mysteriously falling into the baby's crib, and somehow accidentally falling down the stairs. Even the nurse once dropped the poor kid onto the stone floor. Like, I get it. You're disappointed, but that's still your kid, and a lot of people aren't given that privilege, so be grateful for your spawn.
Number 8. Dirty talk. Going back to the 15th century to Queen Isabella of Spain, now it's not uncommon for queens to brag, be it about their wealth, status, their mans, you name it. But to brag that you've only bathed twice in your life, that's a bit odd. What's the deal with this? Okay, well, back in 537 AD, Rome had 11 aqueducts that ran over about 1,000 public fountains, okay? Over 900 bathhouses included. It was quite important, but when invading Goths cut them off, the Catholic Church literally had no idea how to fix the problem. So instead, they just told everybody that bathing was a sin only practiced by pagans. So at one point in history, you could have ran a bath, thrown in a bath bomb, relaxed for an hour, got out, and then immediately you're a sinner. Worst of the worst too, how dare you, having a bath on a Monday afternoon, you monster, you pagan monster. The Old Spice guy would have rocked their world.
At number 7, Mother Knows Best. I think after hearing about these queens who've done some dark things to get their way, you would think that it's safe to say you don't mess with a woman and her plight for power. Unless you want to end up 6 feet under, that is. One Roman Empress, Julia Agrippina of Rome, was pretty spoiled already. She lived a lavish life, her husband was the emperor, and she had a family. But that just wasn't enough for her, and she wanted it all. Julia was quite ambitious, and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors. She believed that she and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, and so she bamboozled her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing Roman law so that they could get married. Ew. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, Claudius died, and most people think that Julia had something to do with it. That's likely the case. She and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so that she could hold on to her power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mother manipulating him and he had her forced out of power. Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world that she desired most, and so she rallied a group of supporters to try and overthrow her son, but the plans backfired and she was expelled instead. Talk about ambition getting the best of you.
Number 6, cowboy action. Okay, not exactly a queen, but pretty close. Hear me out, guys. Sarah Winchester was the widow and the heiress of the Winchester rifle fortune. This included $20 million and 50% of shares of the company. Man, I wish that was me. And in case you didn't know, the Winchester Rifle Company was responsible for making guns good when a lot just weren't. And that model of rifle unfortunately took a lot of lives, so it's said that the Winchester mansion was haunted by the ghosts of the poor souls who found themselves at the business end of a repeater. Sarah allegedly was missing a few cards from the deck. All 6s and 9s, just a little crazy. So in her craziness, it's fair to say she spent some time with a Winchester rifle or two, which is quite a scandalous product for a queen who thinks she's seeing ghosts. Plus, women back then, besides Annie Oakley, weren't supposed to handle things like that because it was the 1800s and men were just really mean and stinky, and come on guys, give her a break. Ain't that woman can't shoot a gun? What are you talking about? Number 5, toxic eyes. It's no mystery that beauty products today can be filled with all kinds of lovely chemicals that make you look great. And there's tons of products from the past that could be labeled as scandalous. Well, how about putting literal poison in your eyes? Yes, that's right. Back to the women of ye olde Europe. The very same queens with the pale skin wanted eyes that sparkled. How to achieve this? Well, you just put drops of belladonna in your eyes, which, if you didn't know, is poison. Like just straight up poison. It's bad. It would dilute the eyes, and that was considered beautiful. If you think that sounds like it's bad for your health, that's because it is. Long-term exposure to the belladonna drops would lead to blindness. Yeah, it's kind of a trade-off there. Good looking eyes, go blind later. Yeah, no thanks. Number 4, the neck stretcher. No, that is not a WWE wrestler or finishing move, although it really sounds like one. It could be. No, this is something I've always been fascinated with, really. It's just kind of out of this world. I'm talking about neck rings from some African and Asian cultures. Basically, over there in some cultures, the more a woman looks like the Kaminoans from Attack of the Clones, the better. And that means it's time to stretch the neck by slowly placing rings around a young woman's neck until it grows. And then you keep slapping those bad boys on until you've got so many rings on your neck, it'll make you say Sifo Dyas. Had to fit a little Star Wars in there somewhere. Truth be told, the neck doesn't actually stretch. It's more the shoulders are dropping from all that weight, which can weigh up to like 15 pounds or something. It's crazy. And if common folk take part in this lengthy procedure, the most beautiful of queens certainly did too. Number 3, this makes no sense. Look, with all the crazy, super awful, weird things that humans have done, at least most of the time in my opinion, there's a method to the madness. Poisonous eye drops do make your eyes pretty, sure. The urine shampoo does get rid of my dandruff, okay. But with this one, I mean, there's just no way. It just doesn't make sense. And I would have no idea how to present this to royalty, especially the Queen of the Nile. Toothpaste made from mice, yes. Just how though? It doesn't make any sense. Like, how is a mouse supposed to make your breath feel fresh over some herbs and nicer smelling things? Basically, you cut the mouse in half, like that's a normal thing to do, and then you put that in your mouth. Also, have you ever tried catching a mouse? That's not easy. Is there a mouse farm? So many questions. To me, it's just a really bad look to have the queen swishing around half a mouse in her mouth like some of Listerine's finest mouthwash. Ugh. Number 2, blondes have more fun. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a popular hair color, and believe it or not, I used to have natural blonde hair, like super blonde. And then Harambe left this plane of existence and my hair got darker. Cause life got darker. Now all I want to do is listen to MCR in my room and write in my journal about how nobody understands me while MTV plays on the TV my parents bought me in the background. Some people want to go blonde. This was true of royal women in ye olde times. So time to reach for some good old fashioned hair dye right off the shelf, right? Let's read the ingredients together. Water, well, that's good, okay. I got a water. Lead, well I got tons of that on my face already, so that's fine. And what is this, sulfur? What? Yeah, that's right, that's sulfur. Imagine slathering that stinky goodness all in your locks. This was something that the highly esteemed Tudor women actually did. Or at least tried. I feel like you need a whole truck of this stuff to work. But then again, the smell. That's not how a queen should smell, is it? It's not right now, you shouldn't. It's not. Number 1, the Canary Girls. When Great Britain was at war, the Queen was a symbol of their freedom and democracy. True British strength to keep on carrying on. So the next time the Queen goes to visit a munitions factory to cheer on the women who are working hard day and night for the war effort, she might want to keep her distance. The high explosives used in the artillery shells, famously known as TNT, I'd break down the scientific name, but we all know my track record with reading. I can't. It is a very volatile substance, but not just for the explosive capabilities, but it's also toxic. Yeah, I didn't know this, I learned this. Very similar to the Radium Girls of the same fate. TNT with enough exposure can turn skin and hair a yellowy orange color. Now, we can't have Her Royal Majesty showing up somewhere looking like Big Bird, can we? To avoid being a literal blonde bombshell, perhaps stay away from the factory, Your Royal Highness. Number 10, Queen of the Nile. For me, it's fun to think about the day in the life of an ancient Roman or Egyptian. I can only hope it was as beautiful as textbooks, movies, and video games make it out to be. But something that I find interesting is that the Egyptians were using makeup all those years ago. Yes, that's right, Cleopatra, being the bougiest of all the queens to ever grace our presence, or at least so Elizabeth Taylor would make me think so, had her fair share of makeup use. However, something that may not be fit for a queen was the Egyptian eye glitter. Oh boy, here we go. To achieve this, colorful insect beetles were crushed up and added to an applicable powder, where you would then brush that on your eyes. Look, bugs don't gross me out, but I don't exactly know if I'd want that all up in my business. To be fair, we shouldn't be grossed out because, I hate to tell you, but there's some products we still use today that might have a cup or two of bugs in it, just saying. Number 9, Royal Bite. It would be difficult to specify a queen who had this done, as there are probably simply too many, and it's more of a, well, service I guess than a product, but hear me out. Something I'm just extremely fascinated in and frightened by at the same time, taking place in Africa, Asia, and the South Pacific Islands. Your dentist's worst nightmare. Teeth sharpening. Ooh. Considered to be a thing of beauty. Many women, and even recently, have undergone this process of jungle dentistry. I for one cannot judge someone else's culture. However, I can judge the experience of acquiring such a look. And I know that just can't be fun. You ever get a cavity removed at the dentist and buddies just drilling into your tooth like John D. Rockefeller looking for some oil? Okay, well imagine someone filing your teeth down like a high school woodshop project. Yeah, no thanks. I get shivers just thinking about it, and all that blood and the powdered teeth just piling up in your mouth, and there's no suction thingy? Nah, that's just the worst, man. Nah, that ain't it. I talked to the chief, he's a dentist. That ain't it. Number 8, shampoo. What's better than having a hot shower after a long day and just rinsing off the woes of the day? Honestly, it's one of my favorite things. For me, a nice hair wash feels good with my favorite shampoo, and because I'm a guy, my body wash, shampoo, and conditioner are all the same product. It's what we do. However, queens of the Inca civilization had more lucrative beauty products, to say the least. I say product because this was a process. What am I talking about? Fermented urine. What else, of course? Yes, that's right, the Incas' favorite way to combat those dry scalps was the forbidden lemonade. That's just gross, don't drink that. They would have clay pots filled with the golden broth, and then it was cast aside to really let those flavors come together. Or at least I think that's what's happening, that's something a chef would say. Anyway, once it reached the desired level of fermentation, it was then used to clean hair. Oh man, what a way to make a queen stay fresh. Just, message to the Incas, just stick to soap, man, don't do that. Imagine just like having it it feels so good. Oh, it smells great. I love this. This is fantastic. This is so great. I love this. Number 7, foundation. Sometimes all a girl or a queen needs is a little foundation. After all, who doesn't want to have a gorgeous glowing complexion? Especially if you're a queen. The royalty of ye olde Europe felt the same way, except their products were a little different than to what a queen would have today. Some products are hard to pitch and market, but this would be even hard to market in a Super Bowl commercial. The queens of ye olde Europe fell into a trend of having pale skin. So, to achieve this mixture, it was a mixture of lead and vinegar to coat the face that gave the desired pale look. That just sounds awful. Talk about scandalous. Our queen's makeup makes her smell like she's been working away in a lead mine all day. Naturally, this couldn't have been pleasant, but a girl's gotta do what a girl's gotta do. Beauty is pain, and sometimes it's really stinky.
In our number 6 spot today, we have Mary I. Queen Mary I didn't get the nickname Bloody Mary from nowhere. Oh no, this name was certainly earned. Mary was a Catholic queen in a Protestant country, which, as you can imagine, was quite problematic when she ascended the throne of England in 1553. Although her reign only lasted 5 years, she made a mark on history in a multitude of ways. She was the first true Queen of England, and she was quite a vicious ruler. During her time as queen, Mary announced a war against Protestantism, which left many who belonged to the religion being charged with hearsay. Doesn't sound all that bad until you learn that at the time the usual sentence for hearsay was to be burned at the stake. Nice. Mary was responsible for the burning of over 300 Protestants during her time as queen, which unsurprisingly left her quite unpopular. In our number 5 spot today, we have Caterina de' Medici. Caterina was an Italian noblewoman born into a famous family. She was Queen of France from 1547 to 1559, with marriage to King Henry II, and she was the mother of 4 future French kings. It wasn't exactly surprising news that her husband, Henry II, had a lifelong affair with a mistress, but on his deathbed, when he was begging to see his mistress, Caterina refused and left him to die a lonely and painful death. Do I entirely blame her? No, but it's also a pretty heartless move, you know what I mean? The daughter of the queen, Margaret, was said to be rebellious, but her mother wasn't just going to let her get away with it. The mother and daughter would fight over the married daughter's extramarital affairs, and it is said that Caterina's scream could be heard echoing throughout the palace. One fight between the two even saw her locking her daughter up in a castle, never to see her again. In our number 4 spot today, we have Agrippina the Younger. Roman Empress Julia Agrippina of Rome was pretty spoiled. She lived a lavish life. Her husband was the emperor and she had a family, but that just wasn't enough for her and she wanted it all. Julia was quite ambitious and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors. She believed that she and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, so she tricked her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing the Roman law so that they could get married. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, Claudius died. Could be a really convenient coincidence, or it could have been a totally planned hit. I'm not accusing anyone, I'm just telling you what the word on the street is. She and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so that she could hold on to her power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mother manipulating him and he had to force her out of power. Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world she desired the most, and so she rallied a group of supporters to try and overthrow him, but the plans backfired and she was expelled instead. In our number 3 spot today, we have Maria Eleonora. Maria of Brandenburg, the Queen of Sweden, has quite a horrifying story that relates to the birth of her daughter. Apparently, Maria wasn't feeling the overwhelming joy of childbirth because although she was hoping for a son, she gave birth to a daughter, Queen Christina. Maria wasn't shy about her opinion. She apparently screamed that she was given a dark and ugly daughter with black eyes. Okay, it's kind of rude. She referred to her new child as a monster and apparently just absolutely did not want anything to do with Christina and would have rathered that she just didn't exist. Apparently, she even placed Christina to sleep next to the corpse of her father who had passed away. It's like a different kind of messed up. Things clearly weren't right with Maria. In our number 2 spot today, we have Queen Isabella. Isabella co-ruled Spain from 1451 to 1504 with King Ferdinand Ferdinand II, and during her reign she had some pretty horrific views and feelings. She wanted to get rid of all Spanish Muslims and Jewish people from her kingdom. Sounds a bit like another evil ruler from history. In 1492, she ordered that all Jewish people either convert to Catholicism or get thrown out of the kingdom. She made them all come to Spanish court to either pledge their faith to Catholicism or get exiled from Spain. How horrible is that? The Queen has also been attributed with establishing the Spanish Inquisition, which definitely is not a historical highlight. Both Isabella and Ferdinand are often said to have done great things for Spain, which in some cases is true, but at what cost and for what reason? In our number 1 spot today we have Rana Valona I. The last queen of Madagascar, she ruled the kingdom for 33 years from 1828 until 1861. There is no doubt that she was committed to her kingdom and that she would do anything for it, but in this plight, she was cruel and violent. She initially came to power after the death of her husband, and once she had it, she was not letting it go. The queen was able to keep away the advances of the French and British, and she left the bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. In 1845, the queen ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months. They were meant to have this massive buffalo hunt. Well, she clearly wasn't thinking everything through, because 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation and exhaustion, and not one buffalo was hunted. Some records of history state that she even had her own uncle executed in order to protect her power, and there is an even more gruesome story. Some people even state that she ended her own mother's life by starving her to death. That is some epic level of evil, if it's true.
Many queens enjoy what's called sovereign immunity, which essentially means they cannot commit a legal wrong and are immune from civil or criminal proceedings. Let's say, for example, the late Queen Elizabeth iron knuckles a guy in the mouth, Deadpool style, because her tea was too chilly, and it causes a visceral spray of blood and a need for orbital surgery. And let's say she committed this armed attack in front of her entire family on Christmas. What happens to the queen? Prosecutors could go after the crown as executive, but then the queen's ministers would act on her behalf and accept any punishment that was doled out for her. While this immunity extends to other British heads of state during their time in office, the queen is protected for life, since that's how long she holds her position. And she did. So what other monarchy other than the British has this criminal immunity? Belgium's constitution states the king is violable and his ministers are accountable too, as does Denmark's. And since 1848, the Dutch constitution states the king is immune from prosecution, the ministers are responsible. The constitution of Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Sweden all have sovereign immunity, but without holding the ministers accountable. If a crime is committed, everyone just walks away scot-free. In places like Iceland, meanwhile, their queen can only be prosecuted with consent of parliament, and in India, no legal action can be taken against their leader as long as they're holding office, but you can get them impeached, then sue, so that's something. Tradition number 9 is animal hoarding. I've always hated hearing people discuss how the British queen or king, whoever is on the throne, just owns all the fishes royale. So animals like whales, dolphins, sturgeons, porpoises, and even swans, thanks to a year 1300 rule. These guys are out here completely splashing around free and clear and completely unaware that they're owned by any petty human laws. However, owning a horde of pets is quite different, and Elizabeth and her corgis are nowhere near the first ruling monarch to start that tradition or build laws to protect them. Hippos were royal family animals back in ancient times of Egypt and were protected by law for centuries. Dogs, however, seem to have struck the hearts of European nobility. Mary Queen of Scots spent her life with dogs and loved them so much that she had hers legally licensed and protected, keeping them with her through her exile and imprisonment, and even her most adored lapdog was found in her petticoat just minutes after her head was chopped off. Charles II of England loved spaniels just like how Elizabeth loves corgis. In 1685, the writer John Evelyn wrote in his diary that Charles loved having a number of little spaniels follow him and lie in the bedchamber, and when the old king died there, it was surrounded by the beloved dogs. Versailles, home to the Bourbon King of France from 1682 to 1789, was filthy and attracted rats. So what did they have? Cats. too many cats. One day, Louis XVI went to his commode, unaware that one of his Angora cats had curled up in the porcelain bowl below. And to quote, when events galvanized the cat into attacking the sovereign from below, a dazed Louis fled, stockings in hand, ringing all the bell pulls. And who could forget Josephine, the wife of Napoleon, who literally started her own private zoo. Tradition number 8 is royal baby easel. This one is locked into just British monarchy, and it's more weird than messed up. The first person to learn of a new young royal's arrival to the world must be the queen. Hands down, no debate, even if a king is in the picture. But when it's time to share the news with the world, well, out comes the ceremonial golden easel and the poster board, set up smack dab outside Buckingham Palace. When Prince Louis was born in April of 2018, it was put on the same easel that announced his father, Prince William's arrival in 1982. Historically, the notices are handwritten, but today they're typed out with the time and birth just penned in. Tradition number 7 is continuing patronage. Being a queen comes with a Bible, even if you aren't religious by any means or Christian. This was just set in stone as a tradition by the olden time of ergot-riddled bread and corporal punishment for showing your ankles. So naturally, we still have it in place today because they knew best back then. Alrighty, anyways, the act of patronage, and specifically religious patronage, was very important during the Middle Ages. It became an active area of queenship studies because it was pretty much one of the only ways that queens could exert great influence. While religious patronage included the founding of religious institutions that could signal political alliances at the same time. Margaret of France, Isabella of France, and Philippa of Hainault, for example, were all patrons of Greyfriars Church in London, but that patronage was also connected to their mutual Capetian ties, the dynasty of France. With religion often shared between countries, even at times of war, it could be used manipulatively to bring bridges of truce. Being on good terms with the church could always be beneficial to medieval queens in other ways too. For example, when Joan of England refused to pay Benegadia of Navarre the pension she was owed as the Queen Dowager and widow of Richard I, Pope Innocent III intervened on her behalf and told him to cough it up in a humble and religious way. This also earned queens consolidations as saints, even sometimes after their passing.
Number 6, Fu Hao. Another woman in history married to a man in the stinky patriarchy. Worst! Except Fu Hao didn't want to be wife 57 of 64. She wanted more than that. And to be honest, I think that's fair. You go, girl. Who wants to be wife 57 of 64? Maybe some people in Utah, I don't know. What's maybe slightly more unholy than having that many wives is going on an epic military campaign and raging war in the Shang dynasty. A warrior queen, if you will. We know some of this history based on her tomb, as she was buried with ceremonial weapons, knives, blades, swords, some dogs, some human sacrifices, gold, money, jade, and lots of other valuable goodies. Just makes you want to loot all the stuff in there, doesn't it? I mean, jade's pretty cool. This was a common practice amongst male warriors back then, but you know what? Good for her and all that unaliving. Way to go, sister. I like it. Very nice. Okay. Number 5, Tamiris. Honestly, every time I face her in Civilization 6, it just ends badly. I'll spend a few turns building my economy or maybe organizing some troops, and I look back over at her cities and she's already amassed a massive army and is ahead in science. Yeah, I'm not the best Civ 6 player, but sheesh lady, come on, give me a break. This probably has something to do with her real life counterpart. Tamiris was a woman who lost her son to Cyrus the Great. So she said to herself, I don't know what's so great about this Cyrus guy. There's a Trailer Park Boys reference in there somewhere. Just imagine Ricky telling Cyrus off. I don't know, you gotta find it. Basically, after losing her son, she gathered the troops and commenced battle. The almighty Cyrus met his end, which, given how the way women were treated back then, probably didn't go over too well with PR. Yeah, she got her revenge though. Number 4, the Trung sisters. The Trung sisters are double trouble. You're getting 2 queens at once here. China was being down bad and trying to conquer some things that maybe they shouldn't have. Naughty, no. The Trung sisters came to answer the call. These girls are actually revered as heroes still today in Vietnam. But what they were able to do for so long was very impressive. China had a very impressive army, no surprise there, and Vietnam was a much smaller country, or kingdom I guess you'd say, and their army was not as impressive. But the sisters managed to hold them off for 3 years. 3 years with their forces. That is crazy good. That is very impressive, and perhaps a lot of bloodshed too. Sadly, the sisters waded off into the waters before they could be captured, because after that long fighting, I wouldn't want to be captured either. Number 3, Grace O'Malley. Avassi landlubbers, ye be looking for Grace O'Malley. Well then ye come to the right place, sir. Thank you, thank you. That is my private impression. I will be here all week. Bad impressions aside, Grace O'Malley wasn't a traditional queen, to be fair, but what she didn't have in regular queen qualities, she did make up for that in being a badass pirate. Nice. This is another one where I'm gonna ask Hollywood for a movie, please. Irish pirate queen? Come on guys, that's just a movie begging to be made. Grace O'Malley was a fierce pirate from the age of 11 and a wise woman who ruled the seas after her father's passing. I don't really have much to say after that, to be honest. I'll just wait for Hollywood to make their move. And maybe you can cast me in there. And I can put on some long red hair and some boots, and I could swim and just put the red hair on me right now. I just look so good. Number 2, Queen Victoria. Okay, hear me out on this one. This one has more to do with their lineage, per se, than her, but it's her somewhat to blame. Okay, so Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, King George V of Britain, and Wilhelm Kaiser II of Germany were all first cousins. Their grandma was Queen Victoria. What? I know, right? Isn't that weird? Yeah, it's weird. Imagine how crazy your bloodline has to be for that. And, you know, the fact that during World War I, all 3 of these cousins were at war with each other. I mean, that's just insane. I mean, families fight, sure, but come on, man. Get the mustard gas off the table, bro. Come on. That's cheap. Just don't. Number 1, my mom. My mom, I love her so much. She's the best. But man, sometimes, she's so unfair. I had to do chores when I was a kid, and I had to put down the toilet seat, and worst of all, she made me put the lid of toothpaste back in the tube when I was done with it. I mean, come on, right? Not like she ever did anything for me, like birth me, feed me, raise me, clothe me, and love me unconditionally. And now I gotta make my bed? This is the worst day ever! I'm sure no other cute boy with blue eyes like me ever had this problem. Okay, comment reading time. We got a comment from Captain America. He said, "Your impressions are hilarious. Keep up the great work, sir." Thank you very much, Captain America, and thank you and all the Avengers for the good work that you do. Thank you to Iron Man. He's a cool guy. I like him. And Spider-Man. Tell Spider-Man I said hello. Thank you, Captain America. Nick Perlberg said, "As a fellow big guy, I appreciate you, Chetty." Oh, I bow to you, sir. I bow to any other large gentleman, portly sir out there. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Wow, that's so nice. Jelly Helma says, "Crazy. I was crazy once. They locked me in a little white room. I liked it there. I died there. They buried me where the flowers grow. One grew down and tickled my nose. It almost drove me crazy. Crazy. I was crazy once." Ha, guys, that's good. Very nice. I like. And finally, we have Curious Man. Curious Man said, "Worst job ever, shoveling concrete in July in Fargo, North Dakota. Runner-up, plastic pipe butt welder in an unair-conditioned steel building in July in Fargo, North Dakota." Yeah, that is not fun, dude. That was from the video when I asked worst jobs ever. Yeah, that is not fun. Sweating. I used to work in a garden center, and man, it had no air conditioning and 40-degree weather. As you can imagine, Chetty did not do too well there. I was sweating quite. Had to change my shirts a couple times. You know what I'm saying?
Number 10, Queen of hating her daughter. Starting off this list with a bang would have to be the utterly despicable Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg, the Queen of Sweden. Queen Maria here seems to be guilty of the crime of attempted delifing. That's a pretty crazy thing for a queen, but it gets even crazier when you find out it was her own daughter who she tried to do this to. For some reason, when the queen gave birth to her daughter, who she wanted to be a son, she instantly thought of her sweet, innocent little daughter as a dark and ugly monster with black eyes. Gotta love coming into this world and being hated purely for existing. As she saw her as a monster, Maria tried to have her daughter dispatched multiple times, and I don't know what this crime would be called, but she even forced her daughter to sleep next to the rotting corpse of her own father. Maybe that's the true crime here, because this is messed up. Number 9. Don't mess with the Empress. The only powerful female emperor in the history of China has got to make you extremely ruthless, simply because you are a target and you would have needed to work to get to where you are. And you know what? Wu Zetian, who ruled during China's Tang Dynasty, was quite ruthless. She took her position of power by force, and she slayed many people in order to do so. But she didn't stop there. She committed more acts of slaying throughout her rule as well. And I don't mean like slay queen, although that does really work for this list, but no, she slayed people. And we don't support that kind of criminal behavior, even if you are above the law. To make matters worse though, it is reported that even her mother and grandchildren fell onto that list of victims, all because they were against her. Truly a ruthless queen. Number 8. Mommy issues. Empress Irene of Athens ruled between 797 to 802, and she co-ruled with her son for 2 decades before leading it all by herself. That's not a crime, but how she did so was a bit more, I don't know, just a little outside the realm of legality by today's standards. Her son, Emperor Constantine VI, was not a popular emperor, and the empress was quite an ambitious and greedy woman. She wanted full control of the Byzantine Empire, and to do that, with the help of some political allies, Irene led a conspiracy against her own son. Poor parenting skills if you ask me, but hey, the two actually made up and were at least somewhat civil. That is until Constantine divorced his wife and married his mistress, turning the people against him and giving Irene the opportunity to lead another conspiracy and then have her son's eyes gouged out. Yay! Number 7. Ranavalona. I honestly didn't know Madagascar had queens or kings. That's not because it doesn't make sense, I'm just dumb. Thanks to me being a young child, I thought the only royalty Madagascar had was King Julian, you know, like the lemur. King Julian! Like that King Julian. But they did have kings and queens, and one of these queens was pretty damn brutal. Queen Ranavalona I ruled Madagascar between 1828 and 1861, and there is absolutely no doubt that she would do anything for her kingdom. After King Radama I, her husband, passed away, she took over the crown, and during her reign, she put a lot of people to the axe, or whatever way they executed people in Madagascar. Her uncle was one who met the sticky end to protect her power. But some records state that Ranavalona ended her own mother's life by subjecting her to starvation. Ranavalona sent her mom to her room and didn't let her have dinner. Or any meals, really. That's never okay, and would get someone like us charged under the law with something. I don't know what exactly it would be, but it'd be something.
Number 6. Princess Olga of Kiev. Okay, wow, this woman. One saint you definitely don't want to mess with. Despite being a saint, Princess Olga of Kiev was actually pretty sinful. She was one of the most vicious and vengeful rulers in the history of Kievan Rus, which would later become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Olga took center stage after her husband died and made sure she would never be forgotten. Her husband died in a very gruesome way by the enemies that we're going to talk about in a second. When the people who viciously unalived her husband tried to persuade her to marry their leader, they sent 20 men. Olga told them to wait in their boats, had her men dig a ditch in the meantime, and the next morning buried the men alive. She then lied and told the king she would accept his offer if he sent his best company to retrieve her. He didn't know about all that stuff yet. When they got there, she locked them in a bathhouse and torched it. But it didn't stop there. Olga didn't stop there, that's not her style. She would later host a steak dinner with her enemies in which they were staked. Very Vlad the Impaler, I know. Then she set whole villages on fire by attaching sulfur to pigeons, and then it was just crazy. Damn, like hell has no fury like a woman scorned, let me tell you. Number 5. Queen Isabella I. The Spanish Inquisition, pretty high up there as far as terrifying points in history go. If you weren't willing to convert to Catholicism, you were tormented, interrogated, and burned at the stake. Who was behind this awful time in history? This lady, Queen Isabella I. Technically, as she was fighting for a holy order for the Catholic Church, this can be seen as holy, but was it? Burning people at the stake because they didn't share this belief? Not cool, Isabel. She created a secular government through her reign which allowed for the monarchy to have more power. Being a pious Catholic, she made Catholicism the official religion and created a tribunal to make this happen. Secret service or a secret police that spread fear wherever they went. Her direct influence caused the Jewish population to falter for a really long time after. Number 4. Fridegund of Soissons. Okay, maybe said that wrong, so I apologize. Kind of impressed with her rise to power. She went from slave attendant to queen. How do you bridge that gap?
No idea. Boy was she ferocious. Assassination and manipulation were her main political tools. Fredegund was among a small number of enslaved women in the Merovingian household that became a queen. Merovingian was the OG Central Europe before everything got split up. She survived political dangers and retained her husband's loyalty, and could persuade monks and priests to jump onto her plots with ease. She encouraged her husband, the king, to set aside his first wife, and then even take the life of his second. But his second wife, Galswinda, had a sister named Brunhild, who became the mortal enemy of Fredegund. She had good reason to be. Fredegund continued to do everything she could to secure her position, one assassination after the next. She was a pretty stormy lady. Number 3, Bathory. Okay. Alright. Technically not a queen, I get it, but she might as well have been with the power that she had. So fight me. She's remembered as the most evil woman in the world in history, I think. I don't know. That's my opinion. Bathory was the stuff of nightmares. Elizabeth Bathory was born on August 7, 1560 into a prominent Hungarian noble family, making her practically untouchable. She married a very famous war hero who is suspected of gifting Bloody Lizzie with the skills she used to kill. After she died, Bathory became obsessed with immortality. Supposedly when one of her servants accidentally spilt blood on her, and her skin appeared younger after. Bathory then began her mission of horror, luring over 650 young virgin women to her palace and brutally taking their lives. She was even bold enough to lure daughters of nobility. Before draining them of their blood, she would make them suffer in ways you don't even want to imagine before bathing in the blood itself. When she was finally caught, 3 of her servants were executed, but she was simply locked away in her tower for the rest of her days on house arrest. Ugh. Number 2, Catherine de' Medici, also known as the Serpent Queen. History colors her story as the tale of the evil queen. On one hand, she is remembered for being one of the most powerful French queens in history, and then on the other, she was blamed for the many atrocities that took place during her reign. Her regency was marked by the French wars of religion and the many games Catherine played within them. The Catholics and the Protestants, as previously mentioned, were at war, and she spent a lot of time trying to find peace. Kind of. But she was a passionate Catholic and is believed to have tried to remove a Protestant general from her son's side. When he survived the attack, she lied and convinced her son that the Protestants were responsible, so she scapegoated them. So he authorized taking the lives of their leaders. Enter St. Bartholomew's Massacre. Catherine implicated the general, which resulted in him being the first to be beaten and then tossed out of his own bedroom window. An estimated 3,000 French Protestants were taken out in Paris, but the total countrywide was around 70,000. And last but not least, Bloody Mary, actually known as Queen Mary I of England, so no, I'm not talking about the girl you say in the mirror 3 times so that she appears and you're like, wow, I'm haunted forever. Queen Mary became known as Bloody Mary due to her vicious tirade against Protestants in England during her reign. She even imprisoned her own sister, Elizabeth, who we mentioned at the beginning of this list, due to suspicions of treason. This was unfounded. She bore her father Henry VIII ill will after the stuff he pulled with the church, and after having delegitimized her as his heir for a time. After Mary took the throne and married the Catholic King of Spain, she began carrying out her plan for England to become Catholic once again. In 1555, she revived England's heresy laws and began burning offenders at the stake, starting with her father's longtime advisor, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. She burned over 300 convicted heretics, most of them being common citizens, and dozens more died in prison, hence giving her the name of Bloody Mary.
Number 10, Marie Antoinette. I wonder what it must have been like to be the Queen of France. To sit in a palace and eat all those delicious foods that your cooks can make while the peasants outside struggle to eat, and sing about bread for some reason. I don't know, Les Mis reference. It's a life of beauty, balls, and not listening to what the stinky peasants outside have to say. Except that's the very reason why Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France. You can only spend so much time and money on your exuberant lifestyle before the people get fed up. I mean, these people have nothing. It's kind of difficult to control people when they don't even have food at home. They let the queen know how upset they were when they decided to remove her head from her body. Number 9. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. Sometimes it's just in the name, isn't it? Like Mario, you know that he's an Italian plumber. Or Luigi, you can tell that that's an Italian plumber's brother. And King Dedede, king of the DDDs or something. I don't know. Okay, maybe the names don't always give it away, but Bloody Mary does. Most known for her liberal use of the wooden stake and the whole burning folks alive thing. I wish I could tell you it was for barbecue, but It was actually for some more serious religious persecution and reformation. The Catholic Church was hot, but the witches and heretics burning at the stake were hotter. No cap. Number 8, Reina Valona of Madagascar. This one is a new one for me. Didn't know about this, but here we go. So basically, Queen I'm just gonna call her Queen Ravioli because I can't pronounce it. Basically, Queen Ravioli takes over from her past husband. She says to herself, how can I make things better? Oh, I know. How about I become a ruthless, bloodthirsty, unaliving tyrant? Great idea, right? Yes, very not great success. Yes, unfortunately she did many heinous things. Something I found out to be particularly interesting, however, was her destroying the many good things her husband had set up before her. Madagascar had some European intervention, and while it's true that a lot of times that is a bad thing, and yeah, it's a bad thing, and it does bring some bad stuff with it, however, it also brings a lot of good things with it. In Madagascar's case, it was markets, modern schools, trade, and diplomacy with Europe, and that's good. Money's good, you like that. Well, the Queen wasn't having any of that, so she reformed. And by that I mean she repressed and unalived people. Number 7, Empress Irene. Kings, queens, emperors, and empresses. Chances are these folks are related. It's a family thing. E mia familia, you know what I mean? It's how it goes when you're the king, and you need a son to continue the lineage. Even though I would like to argue that if you're gone, you're gone. So who really cares who's taking over? Just my opinion. Speaking of eye gouging, oh wait, I didn't mention that before. I made a segue, but okay, that's alright, bad segue. Well, the topic of discussion here is Empress Irene. Basically, her son was taking too much power for himself. She was losing hers, and yada yada, and his eyes were gouged out from 2 guards, ordered by his dear, sweet mother. Can you blame her though? I mean, come on, he was threatening her rule. She worked so hard to get there. The chief was just silent on this one. Chief had no words for that one, guys. No words.
Number 6, we are family. The last queen of Madagascar. Queen Reina Valona was one of the worst. She was born in 1788 and she ruled over the kingdom for 33 years. She was so cruel and violent that she would often choose violence first in order to preserve independence over the island. She's known as the most ruthless queen in history. After the death of her husband, she just went mad with that new power. In the late 1700s, her king brought peace to the land, but of course there were traditionalists who opposed him. The king's uncle at one point tried to take him out, but a local warned the king. That king repaid the local by adopting his daughter, Reina Valona, to marry his son, Prince Radama. Now, when her prince was alive, they didn't get along at all. And then come 1810, the king passed away, giving Reina Lova the promotion of a lifetime. It's also theorized that she poisoned him too, so that's horrible. Reina Lova kept away the advances of the French and the British and left bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. Lovely, like bobbleheads. In 1845, Queen Reina Valona ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months straight for this massive buffalo hunt. Well, 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation and exhaustion, and also not one buffalo was hunted, nor seen. Great plan.
At number 5, Queen Batman. Batman. He is justice. We know this. Well, long before Batman, there was a queen who sought vengeance, and she did it in the most brutal way. Olga of Kiev became queen regent in 945 CE after her husband was killed because her son was just too young to rule yet. Olga knew that once her son was old enough to be crowned king, her power would be taken away, so she had to do the most that she could with her power while it still lasted, and so she used her powers as monarch to seek justice for her husband's death. She was able to get her husband's killers captured and killed using scalding water, but she soon developed a thirst for suffering apparently, and she just kept on going after people. She would not rest until everyone associated with the people who killed her husband were all eliminated. So if you ever breathe in the general vicinity of the guy who offed her hubby, you could kiss your life goodbye. Olga took hundreds of people out of the tribe that her killers were from. She devised a plan to bury their tribe's leaders alive, and she even came up with a plan to set fire to their entire village. It is said that Olga may have locked the tribe's leaders in a bathhouse and burned it down, but we don't know for sure. All we know is that she definitely was not okay.
Number 4, no crust. This next one, honestly, I stand by. I see no wrong here. Queen Elizabeth II, still rocking to this day. She's been known for a few funny, quirky queen things. Like one of my favorites, for example, she has somebody on payroll who breaks in new shoes for the queen. Every time I buy Vans, my ankle always does that little Foot rub. If only I were a queen, damn it. But we're talking about unusual things here, and one of the weirdest things I've ever heard is that the queen has refused crust on her sandwiches. This has been a no-go for about 150 years. It's not recent at all. You might be thinking, oh, maybe she's old, she can't chew her jawbones. Nope. Way back. This goes way back for no reason. Right around the time of Queen Victoria and her husband Albert, they viewed anything square-shaped as bad luck because it looked like a coffin. I've never thought about death while eating grilled cheese, but now I definitely will. Thank you. This must be a pretty scary job, cutting the crust off the queen's bread. My hands would be shaking the entire time. Also, diagonal or down the middle? Let us know. There's only one right answer.
At number 3, Evil Empress. This next empress is pretty similar to Olga of Kiev, whom I talked about earlier. Empress Wu Zetian also had a thirst for blood and suffering, but not towards people who have necessarily wronged her. You see, when she came into power, she was determined to keep that power by any means necessary, so she had all of her rivals killed. So anyone who could possibly overthrow her or come for her seat on the throne was eliminated. The empress ordered the execution of the previous empress, as well as members of her own family, including her own newborn daughter. She didn't want to risk anyone taking away her power, including her own offspring apparently. She didn't hold back on the methods of eliminating her rivals either. Yeah, sure, she could have just done a 1-2 stabby stabby and called it a day, but that's no fun. Instead, she had people poisoned, strangled, mutilated, or even burned or boiled alive. Good soup. Eventually, she retired from her part-time job of sending people back to their maker and started spending more time with her lovers and getting addicted to aphrodisiacs. People weren't quick to forget about all that bloodshed though, and so to get back at her, they had all of her lovers killed and the empress was exiled. She got a little too greedy and karma came back with a vengeance.
Number 2, Ice Palace. If you're a fan of the film Frozen, this next one is gonna get you jazzed right up. Anna Ivanova, the Empress of Russia from 1730 to 1740. Okay, so in celebration over their victory with the Ottoman Empire, Anna gave the order to build an ice house, this massive ice palace. Best place to cool down if you ask me. I'll leave. This ice palace was pretty impressive. If I was there, I would 100% lick the walls. Obviously, someone definitely did, you know that for a fact. 20 meters by 50 meters, and even more impressive, there were ice trees and ice birds sculpted inside. How magical is that? Anna arranged this marriage with a prince and one of her maids. Now they didn't know each other, they were forced to ride an elephant, and all the guests were dressed up like clowns. Yep, that's all valid, that's all accurate. You heard me. You may be thinking, wait a minute Taylor, an ice palace in Russia, was that maybe cold? Yeah, it was an absolute nightmare. Anna made the guest party all night, freezing cold, they all got sick, dressed like clowns. I went to an ice hotel in Quebec once. Spoiler alert, it's cold and boring. There, I just saved you $70. You're welcome.
And finally at number 1, gladiator games and chill. If you didn't ever have to go to work and you could just lounge around all day, what would you do with your time? Really, anything could be possible. You could be like the Bruno Mars lazy song. Well, there's one empress from back in ancient Rome who occupied her time with the company of others. Apparently, Empress Valeria Messalina was famous for her exploits. Since she was empress and she had all this time and money and no one to tell her no, she took full advantage of that and bought a house, turned it into a brothel, and made that her side hustle. A lot like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. Though she had a collection of women who worked there, she also was known to invite upper class ladies to participate in the nightly escapades as well. And don't think that Valeria did jump in as well. She was considered to be quite something in the sack. In the wise words of Ludacris and Little John, she was a lady in the streets but a freak in the bed. The Empress was known to be such a hardcore participant that she would win games where they would compete to sleep with the most men in one night. One time she won the round after being with 25 men. One night. She did the absolute most, but at least she was having fun.
Number 10, moving in. I don't know about you guys, but when I think of Old Blighty, I think of royal prestige. London and Buckingham Palace. After all, that's what a queen needs. You gotta have a palace. Where's my palace? Although most people think of the queen living in Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria was the first of the royal family to do so. I'm not royalty, but I wouldn't mind crashing a few days there. Nice big place, servants, probably all you can eat. Man, she had it good. All that's missing is Wi-Fi. Move over, Your Royal Highness, I'm moving in. Just gotta get my collection of Sailor Moon memorabilia. Number 9, Queen Jeans. No, not a nice pair of royal genes, I'm talking about DNA and hereditary genes. I've mentioned a few times on this channel how the royal family may or may not have been inbreeding. Okay, who am I kidding? There was a lot of inbreeding going on. Sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, cousins, and of course, hey step bro. Now, as lovely as that seems to some, unfortunately, crossing the hall to reproduce can have ill effects, as inbreeding is known to have complications with birth and their offspring. Well, Queen Victoria may have been the first carrier of hemophilia B, a blood-clotting disease. While not having it herself, it's thought she passed it down through royals related all throughout Europe. Tsar Nicholas II's son comes to mind. However, I feel like if we told the royals why people were contracting certain illnesses, they would still do what they want anyway. So I'll just close the door. You guys can go ahead and do what you're gonna do. Number 8. Breaking tradition. For men in Western culture, it has been a long time of bending the knee to propose to the woman that you love, or so wish to swoon. Tammy Lynn, I don't got much, but I know I got this ring I found behind a Chuck E. Cheese. So what I would like to do is I, Jim Bob Billy Abernathy, am asking for your hand in marriage. So romantic. Anyway, bad jokes aside, you'd be wrong in thinking that's how it went for old Blighty. When the young monarch met her cousin, Albert, the love juices were flowing. She knew she was gonna have to lock him in and propose to him before he could get the chance. They were shortly married soon after, and as stated in her diaries, it seemed that the couple was truly in love, which for royals is kind of rare. Even today, it's usually men who propose to ladies, but all I'm gonna say is, ladies, I'm 300 pounds of twisted steel and sex appeal, and I put the toothpaste lid back on after brushing my teeth, so... Number 7. Did you miss me? Queen Victoria was a leader. She held a lot of power, and that means people sometimes got a little crazy and wanted to remove her from such power. So for Queen Victoria, it should be no surprise however uncouth it was, but she had multiple assassination attempts on her life. A lot of which were people firing shots at her carriage for some reason with a pistol. And a lot of these attempts leading people to being declared insane. And one specific amateur who tried multiple times to end the royal and failed every time. 8 times to be specific. I feel like after the first 4 times when the guard saw this guy approach, it was like, oh, man, this guy again. Oh, brother, this guy stinks. Anyway, all attempts to end her life failed, and she became the 2nd longest reigning queen, next to Queen Elizabeth, of course.
Number 6. Mary Queen of Scots. If you're a murderino, this one's pretty juicy. Listen up. Back in 1565, Mary was determined to take the throne for herself. When Mary was just 6 days old, her father, King James V, had passed away, so she ascended to the throne. She was about to marry the King of France in 1558, but he passed away, so she returned to Scotland as the country's monarch. Her next plan was to marry her cousin, Lord Darnley, so now if something were to happen to Elizabeth, Mary would be yet again lined up for the throne. That cousin ended up dying in a random explosion, and then years later, in 1568, Queen Elizabeth had welcomed Mary after she fled to England. So Mary was close, but now what? Well, Elizabeth had found out that Mary was involved in English Catholic and Spanish plots to overthrow her, so she was then placed on house arrest. Fair, more than fair, more than fair. Cut to 19 years later, 1586, a letter had emerged revealing that Mary was involved in a plot to have her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, killed. She was then sentenced to death and her head was taken off for treason. History is dark, my friends. Even if you're family, shit gets crazy. Number 5. Charlotte Augusta. Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales lost her life in 1817, and when I say ancient, this is probably the most recent that I'll go, because I know ancient means way back. I gotcha. But I have to include this one, because as far as royals go, she was loved at this time. She ended up falling in love with Britain's Prince Leopold, but a year and a half later, she died giving birth. She was healthy at the time. She was only 21 years old when this happened. Charlotte was lined up to be the queen one day, and historical accounts say that the doctors here were at fault. Charlotte's tragic passing had vendors running out of black fabric. That's how rocked the public was right after this. Just massive displays of grief. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Was this a doctor conspiracy or just classic medieval times? It's the olden days. We can't really do as much. Let us know. Number 4. Catherine Howard. Queen of England from 1540 to 1541. Such a short amount of time, but why? Being the 5th wife of King Henry VIII, cousin to Anne Boleyn, referred to by King Henry as his rose without a thorn, he just gave her all the gifts and she was just 19 years old. Sounds great so far, but you know, because of his list, things won't end up well. Their marriage didn't even last a year until rumors, not letters or eyewitnesses, rumors started spreading about infidelity. There was a small amount of evidence that suggested that she had been romantically involved with somebody beforehand, so a jealous mad king got jealous and mad again. Shocker. You had me at fifth wife, I don't know. She was executed for adultery and treason at the Tower Green on February 13th, 1542. Number 3, Catherine Parr. When Catherine Parr got a position in Princess Mary's house in 1542, she met King Henry VIII. She was smart, she was 30 years old, so it was a step in the right direction age-wise when it comes to these queens and King Henry. Not that there's anything wrong with marrying somebody younger, that's not what I'm saying, but it's just, well, look at this list. All these people died, spoiler alert, so the older the better at least. I don't know. She was seen as somebody who could nurse the king in his dying age, so the public liked her. She was the first English queen also to write and publish her own books. Now, come 1543, Catherine gave up her man, Thomas Seymour, to marry the king. The two got married that July at Hampton Court Palace, and from that point on, her beliefs were deemed dangerous. Queen Catherine was a supporter of the English Reformation, and Catherine's religious opponents were plotting against her, and they tried to convince the king that she was dangerous. Her arrest was even planned, everything was kind of going in a bad direction, and then Catherine went to King Henry right away and then asked for forgiveness herself. You know, for pushing her views too far many times before, and he forgave her. Meanwhile, others are losing heads for having relationships. Okay, her and Henry were married for 5 years, and then after his death, she married Thomas Seymour just a few months later. And then come September 1548, she died after giving birth to her daughter. The account of her death comes from a lady-in-waiting and friend of Catherine Parr, comes from Elizabeth Tyrrett, only her account is fishy because she never liked Thomas Seymour to begin with. She made it seem like Catherine was speaking about her husband in a negative manner when she was dying, and this is the only time in history where that's ever been an idea. So what do you think? It's like broken telephone, but hundreds of years ago. I'm like, maybe she was friends? I don't know. Sounds like a conspiracy. Number 2, Anne of Cleves. Where to even begin here? Okay, this one is sad, man. Anne was right in the middle of Henry's wives. She was married to King Henry for 6 months, and it was seen as quite strategic in a way. Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, Henry requested that Hans Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister. This is like the birth of Tinder right now. I'm not joking, this actually happened. This man compared portraits and then chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. She was compared to the silver moon. Yeah, try that on a dating site. I praiseth thou beauty, madam. Super swipe. A treaty was signed, and a few weeks later Anne arrived to England. Henry was beyond upset because she looked nothing like she did in her portrait. Yep, real life, this is what really happened. He tried to stop the wedding because of this, but it was too late. They had to follow through, and they got married on January 6, 1540. Anne later accepted the divorce because obviously a divorce was in play after what you just heard, and then she lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Of all the ways to be remembered in history, King Henry made this horrible for Anne. And finally, number 1, Cleopatra. Last of the Egyptian pharaohs and last on our list. One of the biggest questions to this day is just how Cleopatra died. What happened? It's been rumored for a while that a snake bite was the culprit, but many believe that Cleopatra also allowed a poisonous snake to end her life. They think it was a bite from an asp. But there's also a large amount of historians that also believe that she poisoned herself using a hairpin. Her lover Antony fell on his own sword, but Cleopatra, she just poked herself. She barely lost blood. Now, as a youngin', we have to note that Cleopatra was brilliant. She was also interested in learning specifically about chemistry. So this theory about her poisoning herself doesn't sound very far-fetched. Until we find her body, we'll really never know. What do you guys think?
Number 10, Elizabeth I. Good old Queen Bess is one of the most remembered queens in the British monarchy, male or female. She's a pretty big deal. Elizabeth loved to make her fellow male nobles fall under her spell. She was witty, cunning, and very well liked by her court. However, one of the things that earned her some enemies was establishing a Protestant England. Her sister Mary, her predecessor, fought very hard for the opposite. She was very Catholic, and we will get to how bloody that was later, but Queen Bess a lot of people off, especially Spain. She was supposed to marry the Catholic Spanish king after her sister passed, but she turned him down. This led to a conflict between Protestant England and Catholic Spain, but her navy defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588. Mary, Queen of Scots, laid claim to the English throne and was one of Lizzie's greatest internal threats. Mary was a Catholic, which made all the Catholics of England back her. Mary was also presumed to be behind several assassination attempts against the Queen. Finally, Finally, Queen Elizabeth had to take action, and after keeping her cousin hostage for 20 years, she finally had to have her executed. And we'll talk more about her later. Number 9, Catherine the Great. So Catherine the Great was called the Great for a reason. She was a pretty epic woman by most accounts. She even had one of the first vaccines, which is pretty crazy. Though she wasn't actually born in Russia or even Russian at all, Catherine was not content to go down in history quietly. She considered herself an enlightened ruler, and history tends to agree, with aims of prioritizing education for the people. She had many lovers, and there is enough evidence to suggest that the son she had was illegitimate. Peter III of Russia was hardly the man Catherine intended on marrying, and later planned a coup against him, which resulted in her position of power. However, the coup did turn bloody when on July 17th, Peter died under mysterious circumstances. There isn't proof that she was directly involved or even knew about it, but it cast a dark shadow over her reign for the rest of the time. Number 8, Grace O'Malley. We've got enough traditional royalty on this list that we definitely need to spice it up. Enter Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen of Ireland. Pirate Queen! What a title. Definitely considered unholy behavior, Grace abandoned the traditions of women of the time and fled to the sea. There, she took on the waves and perils of Davy Jones' locker with a legendary ferocity. She was born into the clan O'Malley around 1530, around the time of Henry VIII's rule over England and Ireland. Clan O'Malley was a notorious seafaring clan and ruled the southern shore of Clew Bay, Achilleland, and most of the barony of Murrisk for over 300 years. Grace was really well educated and could even converse fully in Latin, Spanish, Scottish, Gaelic, and French. She was not one to be refused, and after spending years fighting the British, she finally met Queen Bess, and not only did she speak Latin to her, but she refused to bow, as she was considered a queen herself by that point. Number 7, Mary Queen of Scots. I told you I was gonna bring her up. A name you will recognize, as I've already mentioned her before, but in terms of who the villain in that story is, it depends on which side you're telling the story on. Mary's story is full of tragedy, romance, betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. Unlike Lizzie, Mary was a dedicated Catholic and spent the entirety of her reign trying to gather the Catholics against Elizabeth. She had a series of marriages and relationships that led to tragedy every which way she went. Her first husband, the Dauphin of France, died shortly after their marriage. Her second husband she loved until he became a drunkard, and then she just started running things. But he was mysteriously unalived while she was 6 months pregnant. He was inside a building that exploded, but his body landed outside, and it turned out he was strangled. So what happened there? She would later give birth to 2 stillborn sons, but she would have sons later on. She would have a son who would inherit the throne after Elizabeth's death, but it was due to Mary's plotting and scheming that eventually ended her in death. So she did actually plot to kill Elizabeth. So that's a pretty unholy deed, I would say.
Number 6. Oh Christmas tree, oh Christmas tree. I was honestly shooketh when I learned this, but you know that thing a lot of people do around the holiday season where they get a big green tree and they like decorate it because of the holiday called like Christmas? You might have heard of it. Yeah, I've never heard of it either. Bad jokes aside, the Queen and her husband may have popularized the Christmas tradition of decorating the tree after sending trees to local schools and army barracks. An image of the family decorating the tree was also published that Christmas. I wonder if they popularized any other traditions as well, like your aunt drinking too much wine, and that one uncle, no matter how many times he's told, says something at the dinner table that would have him sitting in HR so fast that, well, he'd be sitting in the HR office for saying something like that in public. Everyone's got an uncle like that. Number 5, the Terror of London. If you're into serial killers and just a little goth or emo, I mean who isn't, then you know who Jack the Ripper is. If you don't, he was a serial killer who roamed the streets of Victorian England and killed multiple women of the evening, and what can be called the first, or one of the first, modern serial killers. Jack the Ripper, however, is one of the psychos who got away. No one is 100% sure on who the Terror of London was. However, that hasn't stopped people from theorizing on his or her true identity. No, not Queen Victoria herself, although there are some who believe he was a woman, which would explain how he got away so easily. However, another popular theory is that it was the Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor. While there isn't much evidence to support this claim, or any of the claims really, it is interesting and makes me wonder, maybe the royal was a killer? We'll never know. Number 4, Short Kings Unite! Even though I'm a semi-charming and moderately handsome internet host, I suffer from an illness a lot of men do. I suffer from shortness. When the Lord was making me, he just put a few extra drops of cute in the mix. And then there was no more room for my legs to grow. I just see life from a little bit down below. Although, I own it, and thank God I don't have little man syndrome. All toxic jokes aside, Queen Victoria may have been a good fit for us short kings, as she was barely 5 feet tall. She's known for being a formidable queen, but when you're that short, it can sometimes be difficult to keep your stature. Somebody take me seriously! Number 3, dollies. Okay, so maybe my Sailor Moon merch collection is weird. Maybe I just want to be a cute blonde Japanese girl with a short skirt fighting evil. Can you blame me? However, something I always find strange, no matter who it is and who owns it, is a doll collection. Why? Just why? And it's never a couple, it's always a large collection. And tell me why anytime you go to visit someone and stay overnight, they always put you in a guest room where the majority of the dolls reside. There's nothing like 100 pair of creepy plastic eyes staring you down while you're trying to sleep in a bed that isn't yours. Well, Her Royal Majesty had her own collection of dolls. Yeah, that's right. You can just imagine the kind of treatment these dolls received. It's said she had hundreds of them, and most likely wore higher quality clothes than most common folk at the time. Great, now my worst nightmares outnumber me, and they're dressed to the nines. Whew, dolls are just creepy. Number 2, here comes the bride. Imagine being so powerful, so mighty, and influential that you'll create 2 Western traditions. Sure, the Christmas tree is great, but I'd argue the white wedding dress is more. She wasn't the first to wear a white wedding dress, but she was the one that made it happen. There's a few reasons why, and the obvious one is flexing that royal coin, but imagine trying to keep pure white clothes clean in the past. My mom makes a mean spaghetti and meatballs, and I have a difficult time keeping those stains off my white t-shirts, which, if you also ask my mom, is a bad color for me. I was a messy kid. That's why other colors at the time made sense. After all, there's no dry cleaning in the 1800s. At least not with modern machines and stain remover. Hey Alexa, can you add stain remover to my list? Number 1. Send lewds. Despite being known as a somewhat prudent queen, apparently the queen had an eye for the art that was lewd. In one case, the royal husband and wife gave each other art. She got some nice work, and he got some nice works, if you catch my drift. We all know how nudity and lewd imagery can be treated by those who wish to censor it. Queen Victoria felt the opposite and had somewhat of an appreciation for the human form, even commissioning a lewd painting of herself. At least lewd for the time, it was more like a wrist and ankles kind of thing, but you know.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Empress of Austria. The saying wrong place at the wrong time couldn't be used more in this case. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, she was sadly taken out by somebody who just wanted to attack a royal. He didn't have anything against Elizabeth per se, this man was an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini, and that fateful day, September 10th, 1898, he took the Empress's life. In his own admission, Luigi stated that he had nothing against the Empress on a personal level at all. See, what had happened was he intended on taking the life of the Duke of Orleans, but when Luigi arrived a little too late in Geneva, the opportunity to do so had passed. He looked at a local newspaper, saw Elizabeth, and found out where she was staying, and he waited for her to leave that hotel. That's how easy it was. People are so creepy. Keep an eye open. If you're a queen, keep your eyes open. This is scary. Number 9. Royal curse. The remains of Polish queens and kings were discovered back in April 1931 in a crypt in Vilnius. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. I mean, a storm had flooded a cathedral, and they threw down sandbags to preserve the area, but on the night of April 25th, they had followed the water into this lost chamber that held the remains of Polish kings and queens. These remains, with the crowns still attached, might I add, were from the 15th century. What a find, right? Well, sadly the remains were all over this flooded tomb now. It wasn't really in one spot. It was horrible. And now after these discoveries, that's when things got really mysterious. Those involved in the findings began to die off in unusual circumstances, one after another. And it happened pretty quick too. One professor had died after falling down a shaft in his apartment. He had a heart attack. An engineer had died before him as well due to undisclosed medical issues. Okay. Another professor years later who worked in the crypt as well became paralyzed at age 62. A sculptor involved died when untying his shoelace. Just the weirdest way to go out. That's the only details that we know. Just, I don't know, use your imagination I guess. Maybe he fell and hit his head. That's sad, it's tragic. And another professor died in 1936 shortly after visiting the crypt as well. I sure hope this isn't an ancient curse because these guys were trying to preserve their history and avoid the crypt from flooding. Like, I don't know, we need a Ouija board to clear this whole thing up. We were trying to help you with the sandbags. Number 8, Queen Caroline. In a list of unusual ways that people have died, odds are it's going to get a little gruesome, a little messy. After all, that's why you clicked this video, right? right? Some ancient queens die natural causes, and then history remembers them for their reign. In this case, history remembers Queen Caroline for the way that she died. It was written in an epigram from the 18th century from a poet named Alexander Pope. He wrote down, "Here lies wrapped up in 40,000 towels, the only proof that Caroline had bowels." It rhymes? Like, come on, man, you didn't have to do this. This is horrible. That's like a prank almost. I can't believe somebody was like, yeah, write that down. That's good, that's good. Did it rhyme? Yeah, she'd like that for sure. R.I.P. Number 7, Anne Boleyn. The second wife of King Henry VIII. Yes, we have a few on this list. She was found guilty of treason, and she had been charged with having sexual relationships with 5 others, including Lord Rochford, aka her brother, George Boleyn. Yeah, the ancient days were a little bit odd. She had also apparently had relations with Sir Henry Norris, the king's close friend. And when I say close friend, I mean he was the groom of the stool, so they were tight. He literally would wipe his. So on top of this, Anne was also found guilty of conspiring to kill her husband. Now, it's since been proven that these crimes were a bunch of rubbish, basically. Anne wasn't even present when these events went down. She was still recovering from the birth of her daughter, future Elizabeth I, so there's no way in hell she was fooling around with the groom of the stool in October 1533. All 5 guys involved were executed on Tower Hill in May 1536, and then 2 days later, Anne joked about her little neck before being taken out with a sword as well. There wasn't even a coffin for her burial. Somebody had to go and get an old elm chest from the Tower Armory. They used a chest to bury her body near her brother, Lord Rochford. A chest. Horrible. That's so horrible.
Tradition number 6 is following blueprint. Remember Meghan having the Christmas dinner at the Windsor family with her mother and the whole awkward addressing of the getting weighed before and after eating thing? If Meghan was to follow the blueprint, she would have never stated anything about it. Rather, thank the queen for the meal and the proof that her belly is full. Now obviously it's pretty effed tradition, and good on Meghan for not taking that crap, but following the blueprint has been so driven into monarchy, especially female monarchy, that even the public was upset with her. To follow the blueprint is to mimic the royal woman above you, especially should you be in the presence or potentially one day taking their role. Who created the blueprint of what a medieval queen should be and how she should behave? Not any one person. Ancient Egypt felt a queen should be a certain way. Ancient Rome that a queen should stay silent. Ancient Mesoamerica, a queen was equivalent to a king and did whatever he did. It varies per culture, and thus every monarchy system created its own blueprint. Within this, there was literature specifically aimed at princesses and queens within their applicable regions. For instance, Joan I of Navarre's confessor, Durand de Champagne, wrote a text named Mirror for Ladies, which advised Joan on how to be a good queen to her husband, Philip of France, in the bedroom. In China, biographies of ancient queens provided examples of rulers whose behavior was to be modeled, as well as those deemed to be a bad influence, aka your do's and don'ts book. Italian-French author Christine de Pizan's book, The Treasure of the City of Ladies, dedicated to Margaret of Burgundy, also aimed to instruct women of all classes on how to present themselves. Tradition number 5 is dress code. Inevitably within the blueprint will be the dressing guidelines. While they have become lax in recent years for most kingdoms, and women are able to have more control on their garb and no longer have to wear 30 unnecessary layers, they still have certain restrictions. For example, there's endless tabloid attention paid to the Spanish royals for their level of chic. Queen Letizia has openly broken dress code several times. In 2015, when delivering the flag to the 11th National Teach Zone of the Civil Guard, she broke the mandatory dress code of wearing all black and a Spanish mantilla in favor of a short and incredibly stylish white ensemble. It also violated tradition by being an outfit repeat. She wore the same white getup to her husband's proclamation as king. I can't talk about dress code violation without mentioning our baby girl Princess Diana, who had the stuffy Brits flying out of their knee-high tube socks over her sweaters and bike shorts. Meghan was also highly criticized in recent years for challenging dress code, which is prudish and bland at best in England. You aren't allowed bright nail polish, and the now deceased queen forbid ladies from trousers at social events, and you had to own those big stupid hats. Tradition number 4 is pretty pressure. Essentially, queens were expected to be the ultimate good woman, a model of virtuous behavior. They were expected to be good wives and mothers as well as good rulers, but they were also meant to be pious peacemakers and to look pretty, but not so pretty you don't want to respect them, but also still pretty enough you want to pay attention. Think about that Barbie monologue. That naturally comes with the endless critique. Beauty was obviously a huge part of a queen's role, and they were expected to represent contemporary ideals. William Caxton, in his 15th century book book, The Game and Play of Chess, states that the queen ought to be a fair lady, sitting in their chair and crowned with a corone on her head and clad with cloth of gold. She should also, he writes, take care to be chaste, wise, of honest life, and well-mannered. It's interesting that beauty is the very first quality that Caxton names in his text, and we can see this in other sources of medieval eras, such as the Welsh Triads, or the 13th century Las Diet Patridias Kingdom Law Book, where it's written that the qualities that kings should look for in a bride is the more beautiful the queen is, the more the king will love her, and the more handsome their children will be. No mention of being a good political leader. So it's really interesting again, seeing how these ideals of queenship tied together. Alfonso was basically equating the idea that a beautiful woman will make a good wife and a good mother, which takes us back full circle to those expectations of medieval queens to be everything. Tradition number 3 is tax exemption. This one sucks. Imagine you happen to be born in random luck of the draw bloodline and just don't have to pay taxes. Quite a few countries had laws in regards to their leaders, be it king or queen, being exempt from tax. Queen Elizabeth wasn't required, and now neither is Charles. However, Elizabeth had been voluntarily paying income and capital gain taxes since 1992. Her grandsons are also paying their taxes but do not have to. King Juan Carlos, Spain's former monarch, has paid about $820,000 in back taxes amid an investigation by prosecutors into whether he and other royal members of the royal family used bank accounts in other people's names to hide assets from tax authorities. The payment announcement came just a month after the Spanish media revealed an investigation into possible tax evasion, and that occurred after Juan abdicated in 2014 and was no longer shielded by immunity from prosecution. The extent of that immunity has become an issue in previous corruption cases, but it remains an unsettled question. The Belgian royal family no longer holds any power, but receives large payments for their advisements and roles as, not to be rude, figureheads. These payments are always taxed, as are the family. Dutch royals are among the monarchies exempt from paying income tax still. Last year, the Prime Minister Mark Rutte rejected opposition demands to scrap the exemption. His government proposed an annual royal budget of £50.2 million for 2023, untaxed. Tradition number 2 is no ID needed. Royal prerogative is a special exemption statute from certain statute laws. England is famous for allowing its queen or king the right to no driver's license, no upholding of speed limits, and traveling without needing of a passport. That means even though Queen Elizabeth preferred to stick to driving on her private estates, she could technically go speeding around London and running red lights if she wanted to. Japan's Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako are also exempt, as stated in a ministry document dated for May 10th of 1971. Apparently it would be highly inappropriate to issue a passport to the emperor or empress. The document also stated that it will be highly inappropriate for the emperor to undergo immigration or visa procedures using a passport as an ordinary citizen. The Dutch head of state, similar to Elizabeth, does not require a passport for the reason that all passports in his country are technically issued by him. So it'd be funny for the king to have a passport where he himself has to ask for permission to allow himself into another country. Tradition number 1 is 2 birthdays. The 2 birthday tradition for British monarch dates back to 1748 when King George II combined the annual summer military march with his birthday celebration, which should have been during the winter, as to quote, with a November birthday being too cold for celebratory parades, he tied his celebration in with the annual Trooping of the Colour military parade. Trooping the Colour, a military parade, has its origins on the battlefield. A regime flag or colours was a key rallying point for soldiers during battle, so obviously you got recognized around flag. To ensure soldiers would recognize it, the flag was marched around, aka trooped, for the ranks to see. A regiment's colours came to have huge significance for serving soldiers, and the gain or loss of colours were seen as decisive moments in battle. Nowadays, since it also doubles as a birthday party where the kid invited his whole class, the marching of troops is a spectacular and boring display of 1,400 parading soldiers, 400 horses, and 400 musicians. The monarch arrives at the beginning, looks over the troop, the band performs, the bagpipe guys proceed to make an obtrusive wall of noise, and then they all start marching. The royal carriage follows along.
Queen Victoria was anti-women's rights. Isn't that fun? Queen Victoria, who ruled England from 1837 until 1901, was in the perfect position to be the forerunner for the women's movement. Meanwhile, she's up in her office writing letters stating that the movement of the present day to place women in the same profession as men was mad and utterly demoralizing. She stated a woman's place was in the home and also condemned the
idea of a woman becoming doctors or any career. In a letter written by Victoria to her uncle Leopold, King of the Belgiums, she wrote that her husband Albert grows daily fonder of politics and business and is wonderfully fit for both. And I grow daily to dislike them both more and more. We women are not made for governing, and if we are good women, we must dislike these masculine occupations. Y'all, the Queen wrote that! In 1850, the Queen was faced with the Women's Franchise Bill passing in Parliament and began a very lengthy correspondence with Prime Minister William Gladstone, letting him know about her strong aversion to these so-called erroneous rights of women, and that she felt so strongly upon this dangerous, unchristian, and natural cry and movement of women's rights that she is most anxious that Mr. Gladstone and others should take some steps to check this alarming danger. Let woman be what God intended, a helpmate for man, but with totally different duties and vocations. Yeah, it didn't age well. And if you're doubting me, let's take a look at this petty beef. Queen Victoria was not for the girlies. She was a bitter and jealous B-word a lot of the time and over many different things. One was Lady Flora Hastings, lady-in-waiting, but also very close friend to Victoria's mother, who in 1839 presented herself to the Queen's dock with abdominal pain and a severe gut swelling. Lady Flora had been part of the royal household during Victoria's upbringing when the young heir to the throne was subjected to a strict system of rules and regulations that left her isolated and unhappy. The Queen still harbored that grudge against Flora because of her association with this bleak time and also her mother, who Victoria had serious mommy issues for. Anyways, Flora was unmarried, so the immediate visual symptoms led to an assumption she was preggers, out of wedlock. Demon-ass Victoria revels in this opportunity, and she has former governess Baroness Lezen obligingly spread the rumor that Flora is pregnant. Since Victoria suspected the father was a much-hated guardian from her childhood, Sir John Conway, she threw that into boot. Hastings is publicly humiliated, forced to protest her innocence, and undergo a gynecological examination, which proved in fact she was not pregnant. Her swollen stomach was due to advanced liver cancer, and she died a couple weeks after. Conroy and others spearheaded a press campaign to slam the Queen and her fellow conspirators for smearing and defaming the Lady Flora. It dented the young Queen's popularity, and at Flora's funeral 2 months later, the people quite literally dented her carriage when they stoned it. A lot of hypocrisy, especially from a woman of many lovers, one of whom was very obviously John Brown's scandal. The worst day of Queen Victoria's life, the day her husband Albert died. The second worst day of Victoria's life, when her loyal servant John Brown died. John Brown served as the Queen's constant companion, and he pledged to be with her always. After the death of Albert, Victoria relied on her devoted manservant from Scotland for everything. Victoria's children referred to him as Mama's lover, naturally due to the fact they slept in adjoining rooms. Heated gossip naturally made its way around why Brown's shocking informal manner with the Queen and his high-handed, rude ways with other royals seemed to suggest his closeness with Victoria, in the words of one contemporary insider, was contrary to etiquette and even decency. Speculation that the two secretly wed came out when the Queen's chaplain claimed on his deathbed that he performed the ceremony. There was also talk of 3 additional hidden children. Premarital relations between John Brown and Victoria, or possible marriage, it's never been proven. However, when Victoria died, she requested a photo of him be placed in her coffin, along with a lock of his hair, some of his letters, and his mother's wedding ring he had gifted her. When Victoria died, her son Edward had any statuary destroyed or removed that talked of Brown. He also had 300 letters of his mother's burned. The British monarchy has been known to be better than the KGB at covering up its scandals and destroying evidence, and Abdul Karim is a great example. The portrayal of Karim in Western biographies is that of a rogue who manipulated the Queen for wealth. Naturally, that's the classic British racism that brought us colonialism. Abdul was only 24 when he arrived in England, but Queen Victoria was smitten by the young man's intelligence, charm, and seriously hardcore work ethic, and admittedly his height. Victoria upped his status by making Abdul her teacher in the language of Urdu. In return, he introduced her to curry, Urdu writing, and even hookah. That's right, they were hotboxing castles, guys. The court was meanwhile repulsed. Abdul was Muslim and supposed to be a servant, and yet he was closer to the Queen than anyone else in her immediate circle. 4 decades his senior, Victoria brought Abdul with her on all her trips and treated him as a close companion. While a romantic relationship is insanely unlikely, the Queen was signing her letters as dearest mother to Karim. The two surely had a special
upon. The English courtiers hated him, and Victoria chose to ignore that snobbish and racist behavior by forbidding it. Naturally, it doesn't make it go away, but it means it didn't happen in her presence. In her final wishes, she was quite explicit. Karim would be one of the principal mourners at her funeral, an honor afforded to the monarch's closest friends and family. Victoria could not control what happened to the Monarchy from beyond the grave, but she did everything in her power to mitigate the treatment she presumed the family would inflict. Queen's fear is justified. Upon her death, Victoria's children worked swiftly to evict her mother's favorite advisor. Edward sent guards to the cottage Karim shared with his wife, seized all the letters from the Queen, and burnt them on the spot. They instructed Karim to return to India immediately, without any fanfare or farewell, and Victoria's daughter Beatrice erased all reference to Karim in the Queen's journals. An effing commitment given Victoria's decade-plus relationship with them. The royal family's eradication of Karim was so thorough, a full 100 years would pass before an eagle-eyed journalist noticed a strange clue left in Victoria's summer home on a tour. Her consequential investigation led to the discovery of Victoria's relationship, the worldwide attention of it, the novel, the movie, and the finding of his heirs.
Number 6. Hidden chamber. Ancient Egyptian architecture is mind-blowing. Even to this day, we're trying to figure out how exactly everything was built. More and more secrets are coming out of all these hidden tombs. It's fascinating. Technology is for sure a helping hand when it comes to learning about our past queens and kings. And for Queen Nefertiti, her final resting place is now believed to be in a secret chamber in King Tut's tomb. This was years ago. Egypt Tourist Minister Hisham Zazou said the discovery was like a big bang. And I see no lies. It's perhaps one of the biggest discoveries of the 21st century. After radar tests were conducted, Egyptian officials were 90% sure they found a hidden chamber. And it was also full of treasures, so that's neat. And also, we're onto something. Number 5. Original plans. Another theory that surrounds the Queen is that King Tut's chamber was actually meant for her. Yeah, listen to this. The former Antiquities Minister doesn't believe this. He strongly stands by his belief that the lost queen was one of the female mummies found in the Valley of the Kings. What's compelling here though is that King Tut passed away at age 19, so many believe his own burial chamber hadn't even been built yet, or finished at least. So instead, they used hers. But a radar survey around the tomb in the Valley of the Kings shows us this hidden chamber behind the north wall of the burial chamber. It's been said before that King Tut's chamber was way too small and there must be more. His stepmom being buried in the same tomb, well, that's certainly a start. We're onto something. Number 4. Tomb alignment. Nobody knows angles like ancient Egyptians. The way they built the pyramids, I mean, they still stand today confidently. We're trying to figure out just how they made the pyramids in the first place. Meanwhile, there's a team inside the pyramids trying to figure out who is even buried in the walls. It's a whole fascinating mystery. Using ground-penetrating radar, researchers were able to find this corridor, this log opening in the bedrock at the exact same depth of King Tut's chamber. And on top of that, these openings are facing the same direction. Tomb KV62 and this new chamber have the same orientation, so of course we're going to believe that they're connected. Because unconnected tombs don't often align, or don't ever align really, so that's also a sign. We're getting close. Let's just give me a shovel. I'll get in there. I'll help out. Be so gentle with everything. I'll feather things off. I've seen National Treasure. Number 3. Brief ruling. The Queen was the stepmother of King Tut. Her daughter was married to King Tut, so there's a handful of Egyptologists that believe that right before King Tut's ruling in the 14th century, there was this really small window where Nefertiti ruled as pharaoh. There's also a great deal of historians that believe Nefertiti was no ruler to her husband, King Akhenaten, but we don't have enough evidence quite yet to really know what happened. Hence why we're doing a mystery video on the long-lost queen. Now we get it. The reason we're adamant on finding everything we can is because she literally changed Egyptian religion. Number 2. Her family. The Queen's name translates to a beautiful woman has come, and given the fact that we still don't know her parentage, we have to use our national treasure brains here. A beautiful woman has come. Come from where? Well, early Egyptologists believe that Queen Nefertiti came from Syria. Back then, it was Mitanni. Her family roots are still debatable, but there's reason to believe that Nefertiti was actually Egyptian born. In fact, many believe she's related to King Akhenaten. We don't really know. The lost queen did have children of her own. She had 6 daughters, like I mentioned before, 2 of which became queens of Egypt. She may have also been the daughter of A, who at the time was an advisor for the king, and ended up becoming pharaoh after King Tut's death in 1323. So, we have no idea, but we're getting so close. I feel like we're like years away from finding everything we need to know, but also, this last point is pretty interesting. Number 1. Sun god origins. Okay, one of the most interesting facts about all of this was the religious impact that the queen made on ancient Egypt. Both her and King Akhenaten were in a cult. How fascinating is that? They were in the cult of the sun god Aton. In the earliest accounts of the queen, she assisted her husband in a ritual that smited the female enemies of Egypt at the time. There have been a few blocks that have since been recovered from the Theban tombs of the royal butler that depicts the queen wearing her unique blue crown, so definitely her, were part of these sun god rituals. So, cut to the end of the king's ruling, the Aton was now Egypt's main god. She made a new god. She convinced everyone to believe in a new god. That's incredible. We can't even decide on who's gonna win America's Got Talent. She's like trading in traditions and religions. That's wild. Number 10, history. Ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaten from 1353 to 1336 BC. Queen Nefertiti, aka the Lady of Grace, aka Hereditary Princess, was born in 1370 BCE. She was born in the Egyptian city of Thebes, and she was only 15 years old when she married the 16-year-old Akhenaten. She worshipped the sun god Aten, and alongside her young husband, she built a new capital city called Amarna, and she also created a new religion. So how's that? She ruled over what's considered the wealthiest period in Egypt history. Nefertiti had 6 children, which were all daughters, which may have had something to do with why we don't know much about her today, but I'll get into that much later on. Number 9, her death. After changing Egypt's religious and political structure, soaring to new heights as a woman in the Egyptian court, the queen just vanished, just like that. And on this video, we're gonna try and figure out what may have happened to her. During the 12th year of the 17 that her husband ruled for, historical records seem to have just wiped out the queen's legacy. She was gone from everything. Many believe that she didn't actually die, but rather she disguised herself and continued to rule. The next in line after Akhenaten's reign was the pharaoh Smenkhare. Was that really Nefertiti in disguise? I hope so. That would be pretty sweet if we proved that and figured that out. I'm really rooting for that. The reason we believe that she may have disguised herself as a man is because of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, because they ruled with a fake beard in the 15th century. It's known that they had a big traditional fake beard. It's cool. It's like kind of flashy. I kind of want one. I can't grow a beard or a mustache, so I kind of want a fake one myself. Lastly, there's a theory that the reason Nefertiti was banished was because she couldn't produce a male heir. We've gotten closer to uncovering the truth though recently in 2015, when Nicholas Reeves and Mamdouh El-Damadi found what they think is a hidden doorway in King Tut's tomb that contains perhaps the sarcophagus of the lost queen. I'll get into that shortly, but first we need to talk about her modern day origins. Number 8. Berlin bust. Perhaps one of the most popular ancient sculptures of all time was found on December 6, 1913. German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt found this on the floor of the Royal Sculptures Workshop. This figure has some unforgettable details. I mean, first of all, she's breathtaking to look at, and the blue headpiece. These are all important. It was clear that this was Queen Nefertiti from the start. The German team split everything with the Egyptian government, so currently this bust is being held in Berlin. It draws in about 50,000 visitors a year to Berlin's newest museum, a little piece of Egypt all the way over there. We love it. Now, fun little fact about this modern bust, in 2009 there were scans done to it, technology, nice, and it's revealed that underneath this painted layer is limestone carving of a woman so detailed that you can see wrinkles in her cheeks, even a bump on her nose as well. That's like 4K Egypt, it's crazy. Back in 2016, these two artists secretly 3D scanned the bust of the lost queen and then straight up released the files online as a free download. The future is here, I guess. Also, that's a little invasive. Just scanning your head, like that's really? But 3 years later, officials decided to release that to the public, so here it is, take a look. Queen Nefertiti 3D bust, scanned by James Bond secretly. Number 7, Monuments Men. It wasn't always a smooth ride for this specific bust. Sometimes it was a bust. I had to, why not? She spent 11 years in the private residence of Germany's expedition founder, Jacques Simon. Cut to 9 years later, that's when King Tut's tomb was discovered, a totally separate event, unbeknownst to them, connected. Howard Carter found King Tut's tomb in 1922, and of course afterwards the entire world was watching. Just a year later, her bust was finally moved to Berlin. It had a rocky go. It remained in Germans' hands throughout the entire war. Even that big ugly dude with a little mustache said that he himself would never relinquish the head of the queen. So thanks, Spittler. I can't say his name because YouTube. It was hidden in a salt mine throughout the entire Cold War. The Germans would arrive too late though sometimes when stealing rich pieces of art. Like in 1940 for example, they arrived at the Louvre and it was bare. The Mona Lisa was now in a child's bedroom. Curators had moved the pieces thankfully. But when a bust of a long lost queen of Egypt was being held in a salt mine in the town of Merkers, the Monuments Men literally saved history. When Sergeant Kenneth C. Lindsay led his team down the 35 miles of tunnel, and aside from the queen's bust, billions of dollars of gold was also found down there, all stolen from the Germans.
Meanwhile, when the queen didn't like you, it was back to the usual political agitation and request denied. In 1822, after a few small-time jobs in the Tory governments over the years, Robert Peel became Home Secretary, where he famously established Metropolitan Police Force for London and reformed criminal law to reduce the number of offences punishable by death and educate prisoners. In 1834, 3 years before the events of Victoria, Peel became Prime Minister of a minority Tory government. Those governments struggled to pass legislation against the majority rival Whig Party and eventually resigned in frustration after just 100 days or so in power. Then in 1839, Peel got the chance to form the Tory government by Queen Victoria, but he asked in return she replace the Whig ladies of her household with Tory equivalents. Said ladies in waiting were her friends, and many were married or related to the Whig ministers and MPs, so Peel refused to form government and Whigs returned to power. The Whig government was limping, but Victoria was passionately attached to Prime Minister Lord Melbourne and also refused to dismiss her female friends. It took the royal wedding of Albert and a failed attempt on their lives in the following year to revive the hatred that this gathered her from the public. And speaking of, Miss Victoria gave the progressive prime ministers endless hell, while lapping up the flattery of her favorite prime minister Benjamin Disraeli, who famously admitted he laid it on with a trowel. She never hid her intense dislike of William Gladstone. His approach to the PM role was progressive social policies, and she absolutely hated it. And his proposed plan for Irish Home Rule, which she considered a threat to her empire. Any name she could toss, she would. A mischievous firebrand, arrogant, tyrannical, obstinate, half-crazy, wild, incomprehensible old fanatic. More than a few observers sensed there was an element of jealousy in her enmity towards the people's William. He was always more liked than she was. When Gladstone won the 1880 general election, she announced to the world she would abdicate the throne rather than accept him as prime minister. Then offered 2 other liberal grandees the job who insisted Gladstone had to take it. Then she tried to force him to weed out the members of cabinet she didn't like. He refused. Her interventions failed to prevent her cabinets from achieving what they were determined to do, but she could wear them down. One of her prime ministers said handling her was like having a whole separate government department to deal with. But she just wasn't a pious wife or an eccentric widow. Queen Elizabeth was also a bad mama. Let's get it straight in clean-cut, open, honest terms. Victoria did not like children, but she loved the act of making them, especially with Albert. Unfortunately, she was wildly fertile, so you want one of those things. In those days, you got the other thing. She definitely seemed to be one of the women who lacked inherent biological maternal instinct. That's never a flaw, ladies. You aren't broken, just so you know. Because intercourse during pregnancy was believed to harm babies back then, it meant for the better part of a year she'd be banned from intercourse or even cuddling with Albert, the 2 things she wanted more than kids. It's honestly quite fair from her position that she resented her children between being deprived of her husband, not wanting children in the first place, and lacking a maternal drive. Victoria, we should remember, didn't also have much of an experience of a family life, and she was raised under isolated conditions. Victoria in many respects was an awful mother as a result. She couldn't help but view her 9 children as functional extensions of herself, expecting unquestioning obedience, and was bullying them about their failings. When Bertie, the future Edward IV, rebelled against the rigid system his parents devised for him, she called him backwards and lazy. And when Victoria, who had decided Beatrice would be the unmarried companion of her old age and forbade mentions of weddings in her presence, learned her daughter was secretly engaged, she was so angry she refused to speak to her for 6 months. She only relented when Beatrice agreed to live with her after they were married. This ain't just some fun and games, this is the Baccarat scandal. Queen Victoria's son, the future King Edward IV, was a notorious playboy and hedonist. His passions included eating, banging, and gambling, with the latter landing him in very hot water in 1891. It starts with a game of Baccarat during a party at the country home of a shipping millionaire. One of the players was Sir William Gordon Cumming, another infamous playboy who was once described as possibly the most handsome man in London, but certainly the rudest. Gordon Cumming was alleged to have cheated during the Baccarat game, an accusation he angrily denied. So as tawdy British gents, they have a tea and a chat and come up with an agreement that all players would say nothing of this grave offense if Gordon Cumming signed a declaration promising to never play cards again as long as I live. Not a hard ask. You know, he signed it for nothing. Much to Gordon Cumming's annoyance, the story did leak and became a high society gossip. And like a tawdy British gent, Gordon Cumming decided to sue several of the Baccarat players for slander. The trial was a media circus, the future king appearing in the witness box and society ladies watching through their little opera glasses. Gordon Cumming did lose the case, however, the public was largely sympathetic to him and resented Edward for his part in the whole ugly affair. The prince became deeply unpopular for a time, was even booed at Ascot the same month. Another challenge child of Elizabeth's caused a media circus that had her mama reeling. It's the scandal-coded daughter. Princess Louise seemed to rebel from the moment she came into the world. She was an exceptional learner, talented, intelligent, artistic, big on women's rights movement, and the most beautiful of Victoria's 4 daughters. Although an artistic career, or in the words of Victoria, any career, was not appropriate for a princess, let alone a woman, the queen allowed Louise to attend art school and later the National Art Training School. Now, on to the nasty. Historians assert that Louise had an affair with her brother's tutor. Some accounts state she fell in love with him in the years of 1866 to 1870, but it's not determined if anything physical occurred or if it was just a real big crush. Hearing of Louise's infatuation for a man 14 years her senior, the queen quickly dismissed him. Louise, after a couple years, had an affair with the tutor, Walter Sterling, and she purportedly gave birth to his child. As soon as Louise gave birth, the queen arranged for the boy's adoption by the royal gynecologist, Frederick Locock. There's no documentation to uphold it. Why would they keep that? They're trying to hide it. Louise served as an unofficial secretary for her mother from 1966 to 1871 and worked closely with the queen's assistant, private secretary, Arthur Bigg. Rumor has it that these two had an affair, yet the most scandalous rumor about Louise surfaced at the death of the famed sculptor Joseph Edgar Bohm. Tales spread of him dying in her arms as they made love. In 1890, Louise married a dashing John Campbell. They did have an unhappy marriage, no children, and grew apart. At this point, Louise became romantically linked to Edward Lutyens, Colonel William Prober, and an unnamed musician master, pissing off her mom all along the way. And because her children weren't causing Victoria enough problems, then came the Cleveland Street scandal. One of the most sordid scandals connected with the royals unfolded in 1889 when a post officer messenger was investigated on suspicion of theft because he was discovered to be in the possession of 14 shillings he could not have earned doing that job. The troubled youth is pressured to admit he had earned it in a male brothel. Bit of a big info drop, seeing as homosexuality was super illegal back then. The son of Albert Edward is named Albert Eddie Victor and was second in line to the throne of England at the time. At 21 years of age, he attended Trinity College where he made friends with Oscar Browning, a man known to favor attractive male undergraduates, and was also connected to said male brothel the police just found out about. When the police uncovered then questioned those working in the brothel, apparently some names came out. Eddie. His father intervened in the investigation and no evidence against Eddie could be found or proven. That and the Cleveland Street investigation led to some working boys being given suspiciously light sentences. So there's press speculation that the indescribably loathsome scandal was being swept under the carpet to protect some high-ranking visitors to the house. One VIP linked with the brothel was Lord Henry Arthur Somerset, the head of the stables. The next year, Eddie became ill with what may have been venereal disease. Doctors in attendance referred to it as fever, and rumors spread of Eddie's intimate relations with a chorus girl of the Gaiety Theatre, Lydia Manton, and later chorus girl Maud Richardson. The royal family reportedly paid off Maud for her silence. Shortly after, Eddie proposed to Mary of Teck, and she accepted, to great relief of the royal family. But the wedding never happens. He succumbs to influenza pandemic in 1889 to 92, and he developed pneumonia and died very shortly after his 28th birthday. Whether or not he was part of the Cleveland Street brothel scandal, we'll never truly know.